Hare Krishna, nice to see Ashwin Prabhu here also. Wow, that's great. Okay, good morning, dear devotees from Sri Jagannath, from Sri Mayapur Dham. We used to sing Jagannath Puri Dham. It's our adventures in Srimad Bhagavatam. This is our 79th session in the series we're calling Meeting in Kurukshetra. And it's really, really wonderful to be here in Mayapur with all of our friends. Very sweet Sangha here in the room. So we'll say a few prayers and then I'll go ahead and begin. Narayanam namaskrityam naram shaivanarottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudirayat Vede ramayane shaiva purane bharate tata Adavante cha madhye cha hari sarvatra giyate Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim Yat kripa tamaham vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Paramananda Madhavam Paramananda He Madhava Padunga Luchi Makaranda Se Makaranda Panakori Anande Bolo Hari Hari Harinka Name Vandavela Parikori Be Chakadola Se Chakadolanka Paraye Manamo Rahu Nirantare Manamo Nirantare Rahu Ha Krishna Boli Jiva Jao Ha Krishna Boli Jao Jiva Mote Dada Radha Dava Mote Dada Radha Dava Mote Dada Radha Dava Dharma projita kaitavo te paramoni matsanam satam Vedyam vastava mattavastu shivadam tapachayon mulanam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamune Kutekim Vaparayishvara Sadyo Hridyavarudyate Tikritibishu Shushu Vistakshanat Nigamakopataro Galitam Phalam Shukamukadamitra Dravasamyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavuka Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Hare Krishna. Good morning, dear devotees. So, let's do something. So, I'm just sharing this in a couple of places real quick. This is our last public class here in Mayapur before we go. And it's been really, really sweet being here in Mayapur with all the devotees. So, we're continuing our discussion from the 46th chapter, 47th chapter, the 10th canto, the Bhramara-gita, Krishna's message to the gopis. And we want to begin with a prayer. Artaika saranam Krishnam Artam Braja Janam Shatan Tam Chitasvasakam Bhaktam Artyavande Durashaya. This is a verse composed by Srila Jiva Goswami in his commentary in the previous chapter. He's saying, Artaika Saranam, that with a very sorrowful heart, I offer my pranams to Krishna, who's Artan Braja Janams Chatan. He's the only shelter for those persons who are suffering, and especially for the suffering people of Braj. And Tam Chatasvasakam Bhaktam Artyavande Durasaya. And I offer my pranams to Uddhava, who alleviated their suffering. So today we're continuing with our text number 29 in this chapter, and we'll have at least one more session, maybe 3 or 4 more sessions on this particular verse, because it's a very important verse and purport of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, to help us to understand what in the world Krishna is telling the gopis. It seems like he's telling them that they should do yoga and meditation. And as we commented before, even in ISKCON, if you open up a yoga center in Mayapur and start teaching the devotees to do Surya Namaskar or something, so many people will criticize you. You're watering things down. This is nonsense. But Krishna, Krishna is telling this to the gopis. So what does it mean? Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, especially, gives a very long purport on this. And Jiva Goswami, too, will turn, he doesn't, his commentary, he doesn't, very short commentary on this, but in his Gopal Champu, he gives a very long, ecstatic description of what Krishna is telling the gopis. So we're going to do that, and we'll go ahead with this verse. I'm reciting it now. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Bhavatinam Viyoga Me Nahi Sarvatmana Kvachit Yata Bhutani Bhuteshu Kam Bhav Agnir Jalam Mahi Tataham Chamana Prana Bhutendriya Gunashreyaha. The Supreme Lord said, "You are never actually separated from me, for I am the soul of all creation. Just as the elements of nature, ether, air, fire, water, and earth, are present in every created thing, so I'm present within everyone's mind, life, air, and senses, and also within the physical elements and the modes of material nature. Gora graganya gana gotra goloruharam Goranga gudatama gopyada kolpa briksham Gopala Gada Ratidam Yati Singha Gora Govinda Deshi Kavaram Satatam Namami." So, I'm starting a little slow, as Krishna Chaitanya Maharaj said. We're moving along with this at a very, very slow pace, coming to Kurukshetra very slowly. So, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that Krishna has several purposes in his message that he's giving here to the gopis. And here Vishwanath also comments that Uddhava saying Sri Bhagavan Uvacha is significant. We'll come back to that in a moment. But now he's telling the gopis, this is what Krishna said. And that's the focus of our discussion today. But Uddhava is reading something to them. And how do we understand the written word? What is the difference between the written word and the spoken word? And how is it that some people understand the spoken word or the written word in one way, and someone else will understand it in another way? And this is an important topic. It's very much related to the subject here today, because the gopis are saying something that Uddhava is not saying. And in fact, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Krishna has several purposes in giving this message, that he wants to reveal the gopis' prem to the Gyanis, because now Krishna is going to speak Gyan to the gopis. And he's doing that, first of all, Uddhava has great affection for Gyan. It's the nature of persons who study a lot. We've seen this. People really like to study. It's like We used to take the bhaktas on Harinam to Venice Beach regularly in California when I was the bhakta leader in LA. And one of the areas around there, they call it Muscle Beach. It's famous throughout the world. And you have all these guys, they spend their whole day there putting oil in their bodies and lifting weights and doing things, and they have these huge muscles. What do you do if you have big muscles like that? You have to fight. You have to do something with your strength. Just like Banasura. He was frustrated. I've got 1,000 arms now. Who am I going to fight with? There's nobody good to fight with. And Lord Shiva told him, don't worry. We'll make arrangements. You'll find someone who's going to be good for you to fight. And of course, Krishna came and defeated him. So in a similar way, persons who spend a lot of time studying, and even we see this amongst ourselves as devotees, because innately everyone wants respect. Respect is kind of like the carrot which moves the donkey of community and society. It's the glue which keeps together all of our relationships. There has to be some respect between the children and the parent and the children, between friends, between husband and wife, between parent and teacher. This culture of respect, the society of respect, is a very, very deep and important thing. So we're all hankering for that respect. And if someone disrespects you, even someone may be married, but the husband disrespects the wife. He's just looking at the computer, at the cell phone. Yes, dear, whatever you say, dear, and he's completely tuned out to what she's saying. She becomes hurt. You're not respecting me. So we all desire some respect. And Krishna's giving that respect to those persons who have this attachment to knowledge. Sometimes we want to cultivate knowledge because we see it's an easy way to get respect in the society of devotees. I mean, if I chant Sudanam, nobody knows. Nobody cares. If I'm chanting my japa and Krishna comes and starts talking to me, that's nice, but nobody's going to know about it. They're not going to make an announcement in the morning program. We want to glorify Madhavananda's japa today and thank him. So we want some respect sometimes. So an easy way to do that: go to Loy Bazaar and buy a bunch of books and read through them, and you can quote commentaries and things, and you'll get some quick respect. So there's certain persons, and even in the devotee community, who are attached to some gyan. And when we speak about gyan, generally our acharyas are speaking about knowledge of Brahman, some philosophical knowledge. But our acharyas also stress that this gyan-misha bhakti, or this bhakti which is mixed with gyan, is mixed with the sense of the importance of knowledge, the importance of studying. And our friends who are attached to that kind of thing, they'll point out to us that Srila Prabhupada, he stressed we wanted to have Bhakti Shastri and Bhakti Vaibhav and Bhakti Vedanta courses and degrees. But I would humbly suggest that Srila Prabhupada's desire is not to make the International Society of Bhakti Shastri consciousness. Prabhupada wanted a society of Krishna consciousness. And it's possible for someone to be Krishna conscious if they are blind and if they can't read. It's possible if they can't understand the books whatsoever. The famous example is Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji, who was literate. He could read Bengali. His favorite two books were Prem Bhakti Chandrika and Prarthana of Narottam Das Thakur. But he was considered illiterate, like most all of us, because he couldn't read Sanskrit and didn't understand so much Sanskrit. But he was a very great devotee, and his disciple was the greatest scholar, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So persons who cultivate that gyan, they have some attachment to it, just like someone who cultivates big muscles. They have some attachment to that thing. Or a girl who spends lots of time putting on her face and makeup and so many things. They have attachment to that thing. So understanding that, Krishna cheats certain class of people, and he's presenting what seems like gyan to the gopis, so they can say, yes, yes, Krishna's speaking gyan to the gopis. So this is a very deep point, this is our subject today, about how Sometimes the Vaishnavas in a public assembly may speak one thing for one person and simultaneously another thing for another person. It's a very, very deep thing, and it's a very deep art of speaking. And it's not so easy to do. So Krishna, he's speaking this Gyan to teach certain people. And he's speaking Gyan because Uddhava has faith in Gyan, because he's a disciple of Brihaspati. But by speaking this Gyan through Uddhava, Uddhava is going to become, his pride's going to become smashed. Because he's going to see that the gopis are impervious. They don't care about this Gyan. Uddhava thinks it's a big thing, all this Gyan, but the gopis, what is this? And we'll see, especially in Gopal Champu, not in this session today, but we'll see how there's different layers of Krishna's instructions. And the gopis are going through one layer after another. So simultaneously, Krishna is speaking to the gopis, Krishna's cheating the Gyanis, Krishna is smashing the pride of Uddhava, because that Gyan can't extinguish the fire of their love. Rather, that knowledge, that Gyan, Vishnu says, it becomes burned to ashes in the heat of the fire of the gopis' love. So Vishnu also comments that during the beginning of the Ras Leela, when the gopis came to Krishna, Krishna spoke karma yoga to them. And he told them, what are you doing here? Don't you know Vanashram Dharma is very important? And you should all be chaste wives, and you can't just go out in the middle of the night to go visit some young boy in the forest. This is very, very bad. And he spoke to them about the duties of a wife. And he did that to cheat, Vishwanath says, some foolish persons who thought they were great scholars and were very attached to karma yoga. So he made him think that Krishna is speaking karma to them. Now in a similar way, Krishna is speaking Gyan, apparently, to the gopis now. So Uddhava is reading all of this, and Uddhava's trying to figure out what is Krishna saying. In the Vrindavan Lilamrita by Nanda Kishore Goswami, the Bengali book which we sometimes cite in our discussion, he describes Uddhava's thinking. Mora Prabhu Eta Drishya Mora Prabhu Eta Drishya Vakya Prayojanya Amara Durgama Eta Koriya Bhavan Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Mora Prabhu Eta Drishya Vakya Prayojanya. My Prabhu Krishna, he told me this vakya, this message, which is prayojan, which is necessary. But Amara Durgama Eta Kori Bhavana. It's not very clear to me. I really don't understand what Krishna is saying. And Uddhava thinks about it for a moment, and he says to himself, Parukshe kahena Krishna Sandesha je kahe Nivedana kori shabe mana deha kahe Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare. Parokshe kahena Krishna Sandesh je kahe. Oh, Krishna's told me something which is parokshavat. Uddhava is intelligent enough to understand that. That I can't figure this out. It doesn't make any sense, because already he's experienced trying to speak to the Brijbasis. And he went to Nanda Maharaj and Mother Yashoda, very confident that they're crying, and the solution to their tears, I'm a good counselor, so I'm going to go and tell them, Krishna's not really your son, don't cry, he's God, he's everywhere. And it didn't work. And Nanda Maharaj and Mother Yashoda became very annoyed with him. What kind of nonsense are you telling us? Krishna carries my shoes on his head. How are you saying he's God? He's breastfed from his mother. He's very naughty. Sometimes he breaks things and he steals things. How can you say he's Bhagavan? So Uddhava has been trained a little by now. And he sees the gopis. And he's looking at what Krishna is given, this message. And Uddhava is like, oh, this must be some kind of parokshavat. So Nivedana Kori Shabi Mana Dehatari. an important point comes in. He says, I'll tell them that. And therefore, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in Sarita Darshini, he makes an interesting comment that there's an importance to the phrase Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. And we see Sri Bhagavan Uvacha thousands of times throughout the pages of the Bhagavatam. But here there's a special purport to it. Because first of all, in the previous verse, Uddhava already told the gopis, Shriyatam Priya Sandesho, that you please listen. This is the Sandesh, the message of your Priya, your Priyatama Krishna. So he already said that this is Krishna's message. What is the necessity then of Uddhava saying, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha? Because Uddhava's thought about it and decided, I don't understand this. So I'm just going to read it as it is. I'm just going to deliver the message as it is and let them see if they can figure it out. And again, we want to look back in the previous chapter, in the 46th chapter, in Mathura, when Krishna was instructing Uddhava to go to Braj to speak to the gopis. He said, Gopinam mad viyogadyam mat sandeshar vimochaya. That you go and give my sandesh, my instructions to them. Sandesh means, but the word sandesh, Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur have commented on, in the Sanskrit grammar, it's plural. And that may seem like just a technical point to you, or it may seem rather unimportant, but it's very significant. It means that he's saying, it's one message, but you're going to have to repeat it over and over again. And this is what Jiva Goswami does in Gopal Champa, we'll be going on to later. And how each time that Uddhava speaks it, the gopis, they understand it in another particular way. So this is the nature of Krishna Katha, and that's our subject I want to look at today, just kind of an overall view about this principle of speaking. We heard something about different types of listeners from Skanda Purana, and also speaker, and how Uddhava is an ideal speaker because he's carrying the message of Krishna, and the gopis are ideal listeners. And the Skanda Purana gives a very beautiful description of different types of listeners, like the bull, or like the Barunda bird. The Barunda bird is a bird that looks very high. He's up in the Himalayan mountains. But the Barunda bird hasn't actually heard anything. He's just taking a little something that he's read and producing it. Or like the wolf. The wolf is someone who wants to attack the speaker and try to criticize them and challenge them. And the different types of listeners. We discussed that in the previous session. So today we want to speak something a little deeper about speaking, about what does it mean here, what's happening, what's the dynamic going on between Uddhava and the gopis with this written message from Krishna. So I want to look at a verse from the Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, chapter 6, which is spoken by Maitreya to Vidura. And Vidura approached Maitreya, and he's asking you, please speak some Krishna Katha to me. And Maitreya says something very beautiful, which is a good meditation for all of us who are going to speak Krishna Katha, because all devotees should speak Krishna Katha. He told him, Tatapi kitayam yanga yata mati yata shrutam kirtam hare swam sat kartum giram anya vidasatim. He says that, first of all, I don't have any qualification. But I'm going to speak this thing as much as I've been able to assimilate it, as much as I've been able to digest it. I'm going to do that. And that speech, you should know, it's pure speech. And by my doing this, I'm going to purify myself. And if I didn't do it this way, then he says that I would be asati. I would be unchaste. So we've often commented on this, that when the speaker presents something, it's like doing an artik. Prabhuji is doing an artik just now. So when you do the artik, it's not that you decide incense is boring, I want to offer some sparklers, some firecracker, something like that. That's more exciting, and the deities would be more entertained by that. But no, why do we offer the upacharas, the articles that we offer? because we're doing it on behalf of Gurudev. My Gurudev's not here, and so I'm on his behalf doing this, and because I'm not Sri Vigraharadhana Nityananda Sringaratan Mandira Marjanadu, he's a qualified person to do that. And Yuktasya Bhaktam Chani Unjatopi, I'm doing on his behalf. And so we ask Gurudev, how should we do puja? And he may say you should offer 8 upacharas, or 16 upacharas, or 32 upacharas. You should do in a certain way. One sannyasi that I spoke with told me that he was doing Govardhan Parikrama in I think 1976 or 77. And some young Brijbasi boy came and gave him a Govardhan Shila. And he didn't know what to do. He accepted it. He thought it might be offensive not to accept it. And he went back to Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada was there. And he went to Prabhupada and he said, what do I do? They gave me this rock. And Prabhupada said, you should worship it. And he said, okay, how should I worship? And Prabhupada said, you should offer some sandalwood paste and incense and some fruits. And he said, should I do anything else? And Prabhupada said, you can wipe him off with a towel. That was Srila Prabhupada's personal instruction for one particular individual. My Guru Maharaj gave me a particular instruction about doing puja and Giriraj. And one of my godbrothers who also got Giriraj from Guru Maharaj gave a completely different instruction. And later that devotee told our Guru Maharaj, he said, I like the way Madhavananda does it. And Guru Maharaj chastised him. He said, no, that's for him. I have something for you. Okay? So we speak what we've heard from Guru. Just like the pujari does what he's instructed to do. Otherwise, we're asati, we're unchaste. Right? And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments on this verse. Yatashrutam guru mukhat tatapi yatamati sabhudya yava digritam tava dharata natu yada yadeva. He says that I'm describing yatashrutam, what I've heard from my Gurudev. And I'm also speaking it according to yatamati, how much I've understood it. It's a significant point. Don't be impersonal and think that we all have the same understanding. Don't be impersonal and think that just because we're sitting at the same time in front of the same guru that we're going to have the same understanding. Don't think that everybody's going to accept it. William Blake, the poet, was a Cooper. He once wrote that we both read the Bible day and night, only you read black and I read white. And my Guru Maharaj added, and then we fight. And that's what goes on. So this is reality. That we should understand that my comprehension, my understanding of something, even if it's an absolute subject, but my perception is relative. That's a very, very deep thing to digest. It's a little bit of a bitter pill in a way, because we want to present that, yes, I know 5 verses from Bhagavad-gita. I'm almost an incarnation. I know Shastra. So here, Maitreya is telling Vidura, okay, you want to hear from me? I'm going to say yata shrutam, what I've heard from my Gurudev, and yata mati, what I've understood according to my intelligence. Shushushu shadadanasya vasudeva kata vichishyam mahat sevaya. It's not enough just to hear from Gurudev. We have to serve. We have to serve the message. We have to serve the speaker. And then we'll get some understanding of it. And that's there. I've seen in India, I had a music guru at one point. And all the students, when he would come in, they'd all bow down, touch his feet. And the guy, I don't think he's following any regulated principles. He was something of a Vaishnava. He was very expert in music, but that's the Vedic system, not because you have to be a perfect person free from all material attachments, but you have this knowledge, and for me to get that knowledge, I have to submit myself. Pranipat, Pariprashna, and Seva. These 3 qualities, Ramanujacharya in his Gita Bhashya comments that these 3 things are required to have Shravan Adhikar, the qualification to hear. So Vishwanath explains that by stating this, Maitreya is telling Vidura that I'm not going to speak to you about everything that I've heard. I heard a lot of things, but I couldn't understand everything. I'm only going to speak to you what I did understand. And Sakartum, I'm doing this to purify my words, which have become contaminated, asati, by topics other than the Lord. My Guru Maharaj used to comment that the kirtan of the disciple, the speaking of the disciple, the pravachan, the kirtan of the disciple, is another name for shravan, for hearing. Because we've heard shravanam kirtanam, first of the Navavidhi Bhakti, the 9 processes of bhakti. The first is we hear. And without hearing, what kind of speaking can we do? And the function of Sadguru is to speak, and he speaks Sabda Brahma. He speaks Shastra. He speaks something which is realized. The disciple hears that. And then the Guru says, now you speak. Just like Krishna is telling Uddhava. Doesn't mean that Uddhava is on the level of Krishna, or that Uddhava is on the level of the gopis. But Uddhava is getting some benefit. We spoke in our last session about that, about how the Guru sometimes learns from the disciples. And that's the nature of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, is that we give up that Guru Abhiman. It's not that we think, I can't learn anything. But the qualification of the Guru is he doesn't think that he's Guru. He wants to hear and understand from everyone. And as our friend Ashran Prabhu nicely pointed out in our last session, that's not something that we should think, oh yes, Gurudev, you're lucky you have me as a disciple. You can learn a lot from me. We shouldn't ever think like that. But when we have students, when we're teaching Bhakti Shastri, when we're on the street distributing books, don't think, oh, you disgusting, filthy, dirty, fallen, Yavana Malecha, this is your lucky day. I'm here to bless you. That's not the attitude of a Vaishnava. That's so painful. A devotee doesn't think like that. A devotee thinks that I'm the most fallen. And I'm just sharing something. I'm doing some service. And he actually thinks that everyone is more exalted in one way or another. Deho nata jata jata, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says in the song Gurudev Kripa Bindu Diya, that please give me the strength to give respect to everyone according to their position. It's so important. And that means that we should always be looking for good qualities in others. It's such a beautiful search. Some people, they're constantly searching for nasty things like flies, and they find it. And they're just fixed on that, and they think that's what bhakti means, to look for all the stool and all the bad things and faults in everyone. But that's not the quality of a Vaishnava. Srila Prabhupada in Madhya Leela Chaitanya Charitamrita, in one purport he says, the qualification of a Vaishnava is he's adoshadarshi. He doesn't see fault in anyone. And how can we not see fault? Why we see some good quality in everyone. Prabhuji's beard is very nice. It helps keep his face warm in the winter. He's more intelligent than me. We can think like that instead of thinking, why is he hasn't shaved properly, he's a nonsense rascal. Instead of trying to judge them, we can see some good quality in that. So by doing that, then I purify myself. So I also like to read you a little something in the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam, the 11th canto, concludes, and also the 12th canto in some ways, when Krishna is concluding his instructions to Uddhava. There's 2 chapters. His final conclusion is Bhakti, but just before that he speaks about Gyan in the Uddhava-gita. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments in this time. He says in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, Vishwanath comments that he's completed the Bhagavatam. And now Shukadev, he's thinking about everything into himself. And he thought, oh, it's not proper that I've opened up my heart and I've revealed the most confidential secret and made it visible, this jewel, I've made it visible for everyone. Because Krishna in the Gita, he says that Raja Vidya Raja Guyam, this is the king of knowledge, the king of secrets. But I've revealed this. Sarva Gudatamam, I've given this thing to Maharaj Parikshit. I've given this very confidential thing, and I've done that Anvayaveti Rekabhyam Yat Syat Sarvata Sarvata. second canto of the Bhagavatam says in the Mula Shlokas of the Bhagavatam, both directly and indirectly. I've done that. But now I need to speak in such a way to cheat certain people. And so I'm going to speak Gyan to Maharaj Parikshit. And so then people will think that this Gyan is the highest thing. And by the influence of the Lord's Maya, they'll think that this Gyan is the ultimate thing, and Bhakti is just a means to attain Gyan. Right? Once we heard about a Mayavadi who had read Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he liked it. And he read, in fact, the Ramananda Samvad, the conversation between Ramananda Roy and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is Madhya Lila chapter 8. And he was okay with it. And he made an interesting comment. At the end of that chapter, Ramananda Roy spoke so many things to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He begins by speaking about Varnashram Dharma. And Mahaprabhu says, Eho Bhaya, Age Kahar, this is external. Can you say something more? And then he begins to speak. He speaks about surrender. And Mahaprabhu says, that's okay also, but can you say something more? And then he begins finally to speak about rasa, and he speaks about all the different sthayi bhavs, the different relationships between the devotees and the Lord. And he said, this is good, but can you speak something more? And finally he speaks about the gopis. This is really nice, but can you say something more? Yes. And then he begins to speak about Radharani. And this is very, very nice. Can you speak something more? And then he begins to speak about Prema Vivarta. And at that time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu puts his hand over Ramananda Roy's mouth. And this Mayavadi who's reading all this, he commented, see, Ramananda Roy was about to speak about Nirvises Shunyavad, that we're all one. As Brahmavad and Mahaprabhu covered his mouth. And they're thinking like that because they have this attachment to Gyan. And such persons, we have attachment because we're not surrendered. We're not surrendered to Guru. We think that I'm going to understand this through the ascending process, by trying to figure it out of myself, but it's a descending process. So Sukadeva Goswami is thinking, he's looking around him, and there's all these, it's a very mixed crowd. And that's why also Maharaj Parikshit, after Sukadeva Goswami speaks about the Ras Leela, Maharaj Parikshit kind of looks around him and sees that some of the guys there, some of the rishis and yogis and munis who were there, their eyes are a little raised. What is he talking about? Krishna's meeting these young married girls and married to someone else in the middle of the night and dancing with them, and it's kind of erotic, and we're brahmacharis, we can't do that. And so then Maharaj Parikshit asked Sukadeva Goswami, is this okay? Is this bona fide? And Sukadeva Goswami understands that Maharaj Parikshit understands. And this is Parokshavad. Maharaj Parikshit understands, but he's speaking in a way to Sukadeva Goswami. And just like once, to use a mundane example, Narendra Maharaj, when we were in Boston, once he took me, Hare Krishna, to get a SIM card for my phone. He's very kind. We'd just come to America and we didn't know anything. And we went to some office, and there was a young lady there, and she was real nice. And I told her, I said, I don't know about any of these things. I've been living in India for 20 years. And she said, really? Oh my God, I always wanted to go to India. That's so cool, and this and this. And I said, yeah, I've been living in, and I reached in my bag. I've got one with me right here. And I carry stickers with me wherever I go. I reached into my bag, and I pulled out a sticker, and I said, they call this the eyes of God. And I said, it's a sacred thing from Jagannath Puri. And I gave that to her. And Narendra Maharaj is standing, we're both wearing Western clothes. And Narendra Maharaj looks, he says, you're giving her that? Right in front of her. You're giving her, like, you shouldn't do that. That's Parokshavad. Actually, he's very happy that I'm giving her that. But he's acting like, he's speaking like this to make that lady feel like, wow, this is something really, really special. And only very few people get this. So devotees do this also. This is a mark of a cultured person. They'll say one thing, but they mean another thing. So Sukadeva Goswami when Maharaj Parikshit was saying, wow, this is, you're talking about married ladies going with another person, and you're trying to tell us this is God? And then Shukadeva Goswami spoke a famous verse, Vikriditam Vrajavadu Viridam Chavishnu. He said, no, this Vikriditam Vrajavadu, this pastimes, these erotic pastimes of the Vrajavadu, the married gopis of Vrindavan, this is actually something which will help your hridroga, the heart disease that you have, and it'll drive away the lust. And he spoke like that. So similarly now, Shukadeva Goswami, the end of the Bhagavatam has come, and he's got all these people in front of him. And it's amazing. He's speaking to so many people, but he's speaking different ways to different persons. Yesterday, Niranjan Maharaj was telling us about a story he'd heard of Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada gave a lecture in Kolkata, in the home of some wealthy person. And that man invited many, many people. There's about 50 people came to his home to hear Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada looked around and he saw there's some devotees, there's some sannyasi devotees, there's some new devotees, there's some businessmen who don't chant at all, there's some people who don't know anything about bhakti and not interested. And he said it was so brilliant. Prabhupada spoke something, and it was like Prabhupada spoke something for each and every person there. That's the art of speaking. And that's something, as Krishna tells Arjuna in the Gita famously, Nimitta Matram Bhavasavi Saksham, you be my instrument. And the speaker aspires for that. When we, as a speaker, when we're operating on the platform of Gyan, we're teaching in a school, then we know there's 5 subjects of the Bhagavad-gita, and we should memorize these particular verses, and this particular chapter has this information and this, and you're presenting things in kind of an academic, structured way. And that's okay. We do that because there's a lot of people who want that. And if you try to tell them something deeper about bhakti, sometimes they're not interested. They don't have faith in that. I think it's really important. I need to know about the 5 and the 4 and the 2 and what's going on in this chapter. And so we may present it for those persons, but at the same time, there may be some other devotees present in the room, and we should be able to speak some things which may go right over the head of those neophyte students. Maybe present something else for those more advanced devotees. So that's the art of speaking. And this is a dynamic which is going on. Shukadeva Goswami, they're speaking before Maharaj Parikshit. There was his father, Vyasadeva, his father's guru, Narad Muni, but there's also all these different rishis, some of whom were impersonalists, some of whom were attached to Hatha Yoga, some of whom were attached to Vanashram Dharma. And he's speaking in such a way to benefit all of them. So he's thinking that this Bhagavatam is such a jewel of bhakti. Now, if I finish by stressing about bhakti, then they're going to think that there's something wrong, and they're not going to have faith in this. So let me finish off, Vishwanath's saying here, let me finish off by stressing about Gyan. And I'll do this, and they'll think that, oh, Shukadev, his message is about Gyan. And under the influence of Maya, they'll think that Gyan is the ultimate thing and Bhakti is a means to attain it. So at the same time, I'm going to do this, and by speaking like this, I'm going to be able to test Parikshit Maharaj and see what did he understand. Because that's the function of the guru, that's the function of a good teacher. They want to test the students. They want to test the disciple. How much have you learned? And not just by a piece of paper with a list of numbers, by seeing how much we memorized or something, how much information we've gotten, but how deeply did this go into the heart? So Vishwanath says that wise people understand that this test, the purpose of the test, was to tell the whole world about the greatness of Maharaj Parikshit. So in a similar Vishwanath, in another purport, he comments that why did Krishna send this message about Gyan to the gopis? It's a kind of test in one sense, but in another sense, the gopis don't need to be tested. They're far beyond any test. But Krishna wants to prove. The test is to show other people that they passed the test. A good teacher, he may know that my student understands the subject completely well. But still he gives a test because he knows the student has to go on to another university. He's going to graduate from high school and he has to go to the university. And so he has this test paper, the results, that he can show so other people will understand it. And so this was Krishna's purpose. And this is the purpose of Shukadeva Goswami. But at the same time, he wanted to cheat these other people. And Maharaj Parikshit, he could understand, oh, Sukadeva, he's speaking like this thing, but he has another deeper meaning. This is Parokshavad. And we should understand this principle. It's a very important principle for devotees to progress within bhakti. We have to go beyond just the theoretical, informational kind of level of bhakti and go to some realized platform of it. Raja Vidya, but Raja Guyam. Pavitramidam Uttamam. It's the topmost knowledge, but it's Guyam, Raja Guyam, the most confidential. It's Pavitra, it's the purest, but Pratyak Savagamam Dharmyam, Susukam Kartanavyam. It has to be realized. It's not just a theoretical thing. And therefore Krishna gives the entire Bhagavad Gita. And at the end of the Gita, what does he say? Idam te narapaskaya nabhaktaya kadachana nachushashushave vacham nachamamyo abhyasuyati. He says, Arjuna, I've told you all this, now don't speak this. I've shared this Bhagavad Gita with you, the greatest knowledge, but now don't speak this. Idam te narapaskaya, to certain people. The first one is adapaskaya, someone who's not austere. Nabhaktaya, who's not a devotee. Nakadachana, never speak like this. Don't speak the subject to them. Nachashashushave, someone who's ashushave, who's not doing service. You can't speak it to them. They won't understand it. There's a price to pay. And we should value this. If we want to get what we want to realize what we've gotten from Gurudev, we have to realize the price. And part of the price is that when we go to sell it to other persons, we don't just give it away cheaply for free. Then Gurudev will not be happy. And we won't realize that. Once, one of my godbrothers, he was speaking to me, and he told me, Guru Maharaj told me something. It was very secret. It was about, I can share it with you actually, because it wasn't for that particular person. But Guru Maharaj had told him, he said that when you look at different women and you feel some lust or something, you should, in your mind, you should offer obeisances to them and pray, my dear mother, please don't let me see you in that way. So my godbrother mentioned that to me once. And I, in turn, I think, said something to Guru Maharaj. He said this thing to me. And Guru Maharaj became very angry. And he called for that devotee. He said, I told you this was for you. And I told you not to tell this to anyone else. He said, I told you this is your mantra. And he spoke it to him like a mantra. So one of the qualifications of a disciple is that they know what should be kept confidential, and they know who it should be spoken to and who it should not be spoken to. This is a very difficult thing for us in a cultural way to understand, because this is the age of Google. And if there's anything that I want to know, even if it's Bhagavad Gita, I just Google it and I can find there's websites with 12 different commentaries on the Gita, and I can look through it. So we don't think there's anything confidential like that. But these are subject matters which are close to the heart of Guru. So, nabhaktaya kadachana nachashashushave vacham, don't speak to someone who's not doing service. Nachamamyo abhyasuyati. And someone especially who's abhyasuyati, who's envious. You can't speak this subject, because this is the most confidential topic. We shouldn't speak ashadadane vimuke prishinvatiyas chopadesha shiva nama paradha, the 9th offense of the holy name given in Padma Purana, is to speak to someone who's faithless, who has 3 disqualifications, who's ashadadane, who doesn't have faith in you. Fine. Don't get angry about it. Don't get disturbed about it. Sometimes we have these big quarrels and we want everybody to understand and appreciate my realization about the jiva, and whether we fell from the spiritual world or not, or my understanding about Lady Diksha gurus, or this thing or that thing. But you're having a discussion with someone who doesn't have faith in you. If they're ashradadani, then it has no meaning. You can't speak to them. If they're vimuke, they're reluctant to, or they're against. They've already got their mind made up. They're ashrinvati. They're not listening to what you're saying. or they don't want to hear. It's sometimes the children, isn't it? You're trying to tell them something, and they're, yeah, right, Mom, I'll see you later, and they're just going out the door. You can't give them, maybe the best thing you can say is, you got to be home by 8 o'clock tonight or something like that. But you try to speak something deep about bhakti or something when the teenager's running out the door. They don't want to hear from you. They're ashrindati. They don't want to hear. You can't speak to them. So then a question comes, well, gee whiz, I really want to speak. I want to preach. Prabhupada said we should go and preach boldly. Sometimes our idea of preaching boldly is just to take the Bhagavad-gita and go out and start bashing people over the head with it. Listen to me, and try to cram it down their throat and force feed it to them. But it doesn't work, and we don't understand why. I've seen devotees get in fistfights when they're out on book distribution with people. Several times, and people, they become agitated. Why do they become agitated? Because they're a demon, Prabhu. Well, maybe they're a demon, or maybe you're approaching them in the wrong way without properly respecting them. So if they're a Shodadani, they don't have faith in you, there's a solution for that. But the solution is not as easy as taking the Bhagavad Gita and hitting them on the head with it. The solution is you have to behave in a way that they'll have faith in you. You actually have to become saintly. It's not enough just to speak some gyan, something theoretical, but you have to actually show it in your life. In the Vedanta Sutra, 3.450, it's described, anaviskuran anvayat, that you should not, anaviskuran means that you shouldn't manifest this, you shouldn't give this information, because anvayat, this is our custom, the ancient custom. You shouldn't give this information. So, Baladeva Vidyabhushan, he comments on this. He says that in many places in Vedic literature, there's restrictions about who we can speak these things to. Edam vava tajeshtaya putraya pitta brahma. He said a father can teach this knowledge about the Lord, about Krishna, to his eldest son, tajjeshtaya, or to someone who's a worthy disciple, but to no one else. Even if someone's offering you all kinds of money, all kinds of wealth and position, don't reveal this knowledge. This is from Chandogya Upanishad, he's quoting. And he quotes from Mundaka Upanishad. Kriyavanta Sutiya Brahmanishta, that someone who's Brahmanishta, who's fixed in spiritual consciousness, who's performing spiritual activities, who's Shrotriya, who's a proper listener, that person can hear this. But other persons we shouldn't speak to. And Baladeva Vidyabhushan then tells a story from the Chandogya Upanishad, very interesting story, about Indra and the demon Virochana. And they both went to Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma was a guru. And they came, they offered obeisances to him, and they said, we want to hear Krishna Katha from you. And then Lord Brahma began to speak to them about the Atma, or the self, and how that Atma, it's sinless. There's no sin which can touch the Atma. It has no age in the Atma. It's deathless. There's no sorrow, there's no hunger, there's no thirst. He's describing all these different qualities of the Atma. And you should understand this Atma. When you understand that, then you get everything. So when Indra heard that, he said, yeah, I got it. And he understood that the Atma was referring to the Paramatma, or the Super Soul, who dwells in everyone's heart. But Virochana, his godbrother, sitting right next to him, hearing the exact same talk, Virochana thought that Atma means the body. And so then later, when they went to speak to others, Virochana went and he started telling all the demons, this is very important, our bodies have to be served. We have to take care of the body. He understood Atma in that sense, because Atma also refers to the body. So Baladeva Vidyabhushan concludes in his commentary on this verse, in Vedanta Sutra, he says that instructions should always be given according to the capacity of the audience. And he comments, he says, this is especially so for persons who are doing missionary activities or going to preach on behalf of the Lord. And he says that when you're doing some public preaching, it's a little danger. You may reveal some knowledge to someone who's unworthy or ungrateful. There's a danger there. So you should be careful. Devotees should always consider the time, the place, and who am I speaking to. And he says, but, very nice point, he says, this doesn't apply to kirtan. Kirtan's for everyone. What is it? Charuke Mahanta Meli, Koreye Kirtana Keli, Sata Sampradaya Gaya Gita. The poet, I think his name is Purudas, sings in one song, Bengali Padavali Kirtan from about 500 years ago. He sings that in Jagannath Puri, the Kirtan of Mahaprabhu, Chodike Mahanta Meli, Koreye Kirtana Keli. From all four directions, all the Mahants are coming. That's interesting, because we don't see that. In educational institutions, sometimes there's some meetings and you have different professors and things, but it's a little superficial a lot of times because they're being polite. Because if you scratch the surface a little deeper, they all have different understandings, and sometimes very different understandings. And that's why they have different schools. That's why people are teaching different courses than other persons. So when he says Mahanta Meli, that the Mahants are meeting together, that's a big thing. These are persons with very different conceptions, but Chaduke, Mahanta Meli, Koreye Kirtana Keli. In Kirtan, everybody can come together. Sata Sampradaya Gaya Gita. And he says in that Kirtan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there's 100 different Sampradayas, all coming together and doing Kirtan together. So Baladev then he's saying in this verse, his commentary in this verse, in Vedanta Sutra, that these restrictions about speaking, they don't apply to Kirtan. That's why we do Harinam for everyone. But when you don't speak, sometimes we stop and we say a few words to the audience, but you don't start speaking about the 47th chapter, the 10th canto, and it's called the Bhramara-gita, and there's this bumblebee, and Krishna speaking, sending a message to the gopis. They can't understand that. We just say some simple things. We're all looking for happiness, but we're like the fish out of water, and we say some simple things like that. So Baladev says, whoever can get them to chant, they should, but you should not necessarily try to immediately explain the intimate understanding about bhakti. But at the same time, it's also required for devotees. If all we do is kirtan with the devotees and we don't go further and speak something about Bhramara-gita, about Gopi-gita, about Chaitanya Charitamrita, then what conception will we have in our kirtan? And therefore, we gave a talk for Del Gauranga Prabhu in his Kirtan Academy here not so long ago, which we called the Kirtan Katha Symbiosis, and how there's a symbiotic connection between Kirtan and Katha. And it's not enough just to do one, just as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta comments that we have, that Krishna is there in the form of the name, and Radharani is present in the form of Krishna Katha. The Krishna Katha is a little more confidential. Radharani is a little more confidential. And the purpose of Radharani, her mood is to bring you to Krishna. That Krishna Katha's purpose is to bring you to the kirtan. Right? And the purpose of the kirtan is to help you to understand Radharani, the two on a symbiotic, circular kind of relationship. And therefore Srila Prabhupada always had a three-layered sandwich in his programs. He would do kirtan, to speak in a way that some yogis might appreciate, to open up the chakras of the heart. That kirtan will open the heart chakra, open the mind chakra, and they'll become more receptive. And then he would speak some Krishna Katha. Depending on the audience, he would say certain things. And then at the end, again, he would do kirtan. But the kirtan at the end, now it's kirtan with a conception. It's carrying with it the conception that he spoke in the katha. So we like to do this in Jagannath Puri in our home. And this is what goes on in the Gambhira. There's kirtan, katha, kirtan, kirtan, katha, kirtan. And that kirtan then has a conception within it. So it's not, we say Harinama, Harinama, Harinama Eva Kevalam. That is sufficient just to chant the holy name and nothing else is required. It doesn't say Swadhyaya, Swadhyaya, Swadhyaya Eva Kevalam that you should study and recite. but it says just do kirtan. So then what is the necessity of reading Srimad Bhagavatam? I won't go to class. I'll just go in Harinam with Nanta Gauranga Prabhu, and there's no necessity to hear anything. But what will the conception of your kirtan be? And we've seen there are some people, I see in Jagannath Puri, there's some Mayavadis who chant the Hare Krishna mantra. And they think that the mantra, the purpose of it is to merge with the Lord and to realize that I am the absolute truth. So we need to have a conception. So these should go together. There should be a symbiosis. It's not just by reading that we're going to understand something. I'd like to finish off, and devotees can share some reflections or comments if you have anything. I'd like to finish off with a couple of startling statements from Srila Prabhupada. We know Srila Prabhupada said so many times that I'm present in my books, and that everything is in my books. I'll always live in my books. And you can get everything from those books. But Prabhupada sometimes said some other things also. In 21st of May, 1975, in Melbourne, Australia, Madhudwisa Prabhu asked Srila Prabhupada, as we would say in the game shows and television in America, the $64,000 question. He said, Prabhupada, in the case of your books, can someone become a devotee without actually meeting you, but just by reading your books? Will your purports, will that serve as an explanation? And Prabhupada says twice, no, no. He says, anybody who understands the subject matter, they can explain it. That is the parampara system. Therefore, Prabhupada writes in the Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 2, text 18, purport, the messages of the book Bhagavat have to be received from the devotee Bhagavat. And the combination of these two Bhagavats will help the neophyte devotee to make progress on and on. In a lecture Prabhupada gave in Rome in 1974, he said, if you want to read the Srimad Bhagavatam, you must approach a person who's a life-living Bhagavat. Bhagavata Purigiya, Bhagavata Shtani. Otherwise, there's no question of Bhagavat realization. Prabhupada, in a lecture in Bombay in 1973, he said, some rascals, they say, what is the use of accepting Guru? Prabhupada says, of course, they've got very bad experience. I love that statement. That's so prophetic, isn't it? Some people say, what is the use of accepting Guru? I'll just read the books. Prabhupada says that word for word. And Prabhupada says, of course, they've got very bad experience. Well, this is what happened today. And Prabhupada goes on, it's not that if I like, I can go to a Guru. If I don't like, I can read the books at home. Prabhupada said, it's not possible. He said, you may have read Bhagavad-gita 100 times, but you won't understand a single word because you haven't approached person. So here we find Uddhava, he's got the book in front of him. He's got this message from Krishna directly. Krishna gave him to speak to the gopis. But Uddhava himself can't understand it. That's a very, very deep point. And the point, because there's a letter understanding, there's an external understanding, but there's also a deeper internal understanding. And who's the real student, who's the real teacher in this exchange? It's the gopis who are the real teachers. And Uddhava is actually the student. Uddhava thinks he's going to give this message, but as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was saying, and Vrindavan Lilamrita was explaining, Uddhava doesn't understand it. And so he thinks, well, I'm just going to read it as it is. And that's the proper thing to do. If I don't understand it, as Maitreya was telling Vidura, I'm going to speak to you, yata shrutam, what I've heard from my Gurudev, but I'm only going to speak yata mati, what I've understood from my Gurudev. And I'm doing that sakartum asatim. I'm doing that to purify myself. Otherwise, I'll be asati, I'll be unchaste. So this is our system of hearing, and this is a dynamic which is going on here. It's a lot to kind of speak and digest. I hope the devotees can understand this. So we have a few devotees here on Zoom, Ashwin and Brinda Sundari and Vraja-gopis. If you want to make some comment, you can. Nice to see Vraja-gopis. Does anybody want to share any reflections from what we're speaking today? Vraja-gopis, do you have anything? Or Gauri Tai Prabhu? Or
As you know, I just joined in the middle.
Uh-huh.
So I just like all these things that I think the most important for me was the quotes that you say of Srila Prabhupada. And the way that without realization or without Vigyan, actually, our preaching has no value.
It has some, and this is a point Maitreya is telling to Vidura. It's not that I shouldn't speak, and it's not that we shouldn't speak. Sometimes devotees, they say, well, Prabhu, I can't go out. I can't go out in Harinam. I can't go out in book distribution because I haven't realized it. And there's some value to that humble attitude. But we're going out there not because we're qualified. We're going out there to get some benefit. And if we're very fortunate, just like Uddhava, he's going to do book distribution. And he was sent to Vrindavan. And he thought, I'm going to preach to these guys. But he went there and he had a very wonderful surprise that actually there's so much for me to learn here. And even though we may be unqualified, if we take the order of Gurudev in a humble way, it doesn't belong to me, I'm just going out to try to repeat this, then we may meet so many people on the street who may blow our mind. And they may be so much, much more advanced than us. So it's a nice, important point. Thank you, Vraja-gopis. It's nice to see you up. It's like for Vraja-gopis right now, I think it's about, what, 4 o'clock in the morning right now? Yeah, thank you for taking part today. Appreciate it. Ashwin Prabhu, do you have anything? Or Bindu Sundari? Or Gwanitai Prabhu? Okay. So if anybody has anything on Facebook, let me just look and see. Janardhan Prabhu is here. Nice to see you. Anybody here in the room, have any reflections or anything on Prabhu? So I'm going to repeat what you say so the devotees online can hear. Okay.
You mentioned that some devotees get knowledge because they want some.
Hare Krishna. Ananta Gauranga Prabhu was just he has a nice question. He says that I was saying that sometimes some people they accumulate knowledge so they can get some respect. And how can we avoid that? Prabhupada also wanted us to study his books and wanted us to do Bhakti Shastri. So as you may be expecting, my answer is that we should have a proper attitude. It's obvious, isn't it? That if we do that as a service, if we take our Bhakti Shastri, if we study Sanskrit, not so that I'll become famous and I can defeat everybody, but so that I can serve my Gurudev, that's appropriate. But then another question comes kind of innately within that question. Okay, but is that just an intellectual adjustment? Maybe what if I'm not really like that? What if I externally I say, yes, I have to serve Gurudev, and so that's why I'm going and studying. But inside, my real motivation is that I want to be famous as the greatest astrologer in Mayapur. I want this or that, and that's why I'm giving classes. It may not be so pure. Well, Vedic culture is ready for you. And Vedic culture understands that. Therefore, we have this external ritual, this external thing. We go to Sadhu Guru, and we ask for his ashirvad, his blessing. We go to Gurudev. And Gurudev then may chastise us. One devotee I know, he just bought a big, big parcel of land because he wanted to have a cow. And he's building his house, and he went to his guru and said, so Guru Maharaj, we got this big plot of land, and I just want to ask you permission to have a cow. And it's like, he's just thinking it's just a formal question. His guru said, no. And he said, well, Guru Maharaj, we don't have any children, and everybody tells us it'd be really good for my wife if we have a cow and things. And Guru said, no. Okay. So it seemed like a good thing. We should all have a cow, right? We should all study Shastri. But Gurudev may tell you at a certain point, certain time, no, you don't study that. You study this other thing. Or he may see your mood is wrong. So on our side, it may be a little mechanical, like my friend, maybe his approaching his guru was a little mechanical to ask for formal permission to keep a cow. It's a no-brainer, right? Everybody should have a cow. I have enough property. We're here to take care of it. But he thought I should formally do this. But by doing that formal thing within Vedic culture, the formal will lead us to the informal. We have certain rules and aspects of etiquette that we follow, which will help us to go deeper into things. Is that okay, Anantaguru? It was a really good question. Anybody else with any reflections that comes in Krishna Kirtan? I'm going to repeat what you say, so speak loudly.
You were mentioning about speaking to, or if you're going to say something, they should trust you. Otherwise, they may not accept it, or they may take it the wrong way. Or actually, this is something that I've gone through a lot growing up. Because at one point I started when I was, I don't know, 12, 13, something like this. I started to become serious in practicing Krishna consciousness, and then my other friends weren't. And so as I was becoming fanatical and everything like this, so a lot of the things that I would say, they didn't like it. And after some years, I started to just not say anything to discourage them or something like that. And then so something, I don't know if this is correct, but something that I do now is I'll try to see where they're at. So I'll say something and then just see how they respond. And if I see that they respond negative, then I don't continue. And then if I say something positive, if they respond positive, then I feel like, okay, maybe this is something that we can continue discussing. I'm not sure if that's...
But that's beautiful. Let me just repeat the essence of what you said. So Krishna Kirtan was just pointing out that when he grew up, he started becoming more serious about Krishna Bhakti when he was 12 or 13 years old. That was about 30 years ago. But he found that his friends weren't there with him, and he was real enthusiastic, and he wanted to share that with them. And sometimes they would look, leave me alone, man. Don't. And then they felt he was being pushy. So he learned over the years that he wanted to say something about Krishna to them, but he would have to speak in a certain way that they found interesting. It reminded me of something Kadambakanu Maharaj told us once, that he said that when he grew up in Holland, I think it was, somewhere in the Netherlands, and he said there's many, what do you call those things? Canals. Many canals there. And as we were growing up, sometimes we jump from one side of the canal to the other. And you're going with your friends, and you jump from one side to the other side, and you turn around expecting your friends to also jump with you. But some of them, it was too big a jump, and they wouldn't do that. He said, so similarly, when I took sannyas, I was expecting all my friends are also